History keeps its darkest stories hidden in plain sight. Some of them are whispered in sagas, carved into runes, or passed down as chilling tales by firesides. One of the most brutal and most debated is the ritual known as the Blood Eagle. The image itself is impossible to forget. A man, bound and broken, laid prone as a ceremonial butcher lifts a blade. Ribs are severed from the spine. Lungs are pulled through the opening. The victim's back is carved into what looks like wings, and then, in certain retellings, the lungs are draped outward, creating the grotesque impression of flight. The Blood Eagle. But before you recoil, let's slow down. The stories we have are tangled, a knot of history, legend, and poetic excess. The earliest accounts appear in Norse sagas and later medieval chronicles written by Christian monks. Those monks had reasons to emphasize pagan brutality. Norse poets had reasons to dramatize vengeance. And yet, the Blood Eagle persists in the historical imagination because its horror is almost archetypal. A ritual that turns execution into spectacle, violence into myth. To understand the Blood Eagle, you need to step into a world where honor, vengeance, and public reputation shaped everything. Viking society was built on oaths and blood feuds. Slights were answered with blows. Betrayals demanded retribution. Stories functioned as social law. To be shamed in a saga was to be ruined in life. In that context, the Blood Eagle became symbolic. It was punishment, certainly, but it was also a message. This is what happens to those who betray kin. This is what happens to those who cross the gods and men. The sagas name a few famous victims. One tale tells of Halfdan, a king whose killers are said to have suffered the Blood Eagle at the hands of his brother or his son. Another speaks of Ivar the Boneless, who, according to some chroniclers, both inflicted and received terrifying forms of vengeance. Each account is as much about drama and moral lesson as it is about fact. So, what did the ritual actually involve? The sources vary, and historians disagree. Some descriptions are literal: a butchered back, cracked ribs, lungs arranged like wings. Other accounts read more like metaphor. The eagle perhaps symbolized a brutal public execution, or even a poetic way to describe slaying in battle. Some scholars argue the phrase might mean cutting the back in a way that left the victim open to the elements, an eagle-like exposure, rather than a precise surgical procedure. But whether literal or symbolic, the effect in the narratives is the same: utter humiliation and irreversible mutilation. The Blood Eagle was not a private execution. It was public theater. Victims were stripped of status and dignity in front of the community. The act was designed to terrorize family and foes alike, a warning writ in flesh. We should also consider the sources. Much of what we know comes from Christian chroniclers writing decades or centuries later. To them, pagan rites were evidence of barbarism, moral proof that conversion was necessary. Their retellings were sometimes sensationalized. At the same time, Norse poetry and saga tradition loved vivid images. Skalds, poets, used gruesome metaphors to honor heroes and vilify enemies. A poetic description of revenge could morph into an apparently literal procedure by the time it reached a monastery scribe. Historians must therefore read these texts like a palimpsest, peeling away layers of rhetoric, theology, and political bias. Despite the debate, the Blood Eagle's cultural power is undeniable. It became a tool of memory, a way to mark a story as terrible and important. In dramatic retellings, it's used to show the cost of betrayal, to burn events into the communal mind. Think of it as the Viking version of an immortal image, a moral scar that guarantees a tale's survival. Another layer to the story is the psychology of ritualized violence itself. Rituals transform violence into language, into meaning. When an execution is done ritually, the act is no longer merely punishment. It becomes a performance intended to reshape social order. The Blood Eagle sits at that intersection, anatomically horrifying whether real or symbolic, but functionally about communication. It broadcasted power relations, who ruled, who enforced justice, and how reputation was policed. Modern reactions tell us as much about today as about the past. Victorian and medieval writers recorded the stories with horror, eager to emphasize pagan cruelty. In the 20th and 21st centuries, the image has been borrowed by artists, authors, and filmmakers who want something viscerally memorable to explore themes of vengeance and brutality. Sometimes the blood eagle is stripped of its historical context and used simply as shock value. Other times, it prompts scholars to ask deeper questions about how societies remember violence. What can we learn from this? First, that history is rarely a clean record of events. It's a conversation spanning centuries. Second, that violent images endure because they serve social functions: to warn, to avenge, to create cautionary legends. And third, that when we peek behind the horror, we often find a web of motives: political gain, poetic license, religious polemic, and human cruelty. So, did the blood eagle happen exactly as the worst stories tell us? Maybe. Maybe not. Perhaps some brutal, ritualized executions took place and later sagas embroidered them into myth. Perhaps the phrase described a particularly humiliating way to leave a body exposed. The uncertainty doesn't make the tale any less powerful. It only forces us to confront how memory, violence, and storytelling shape each other. In the end, the blood eagle is a mirror. It reflects a world where honor could be enforced with the most extreme measures and where stories of brutal retribution circulated to keep order. It also reflects us, our fascination with the grotesque, our need to name and narrate the limits of human cruelty. If you leave with one thought, let it be this: behind every shocking legend is a history of real people. Victims, perpetrators, poets, and chroniclers, all tangled in the same dangerous human business of meaning-making. History isn't just a list of facts. It's a collection of stories that shaped how people lived, feared, and remembered. The blood eagle may live between myth and reality, but its true power is not in its veracity. It is in the way it reveals a culture that used terror as language and how that language survives to haunt us today.